Good morning, Katherine Wintsch. I am over the moon to be talking to you this morning. I know it's very early for you. Welcome, listeners. You are going to have an absolutely delightful episode ahead of you. Katherine is the best-selling author of Slay Like a Mother, and we first connected on LinkedIn, and the minute we started talking, I realised how much overlap there is in all of our lives as women and as mothers in some of the stories and the journeys that we share. Would you like to introduce yourself better than I have to the audience?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Like you said, my name is Katherine Wintsch, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. I am happily married, have two teenagers, so I'm in the thick of that phase of life, and I am an entrepreneur. I started and run a consulting company called the Mom Complex, where we consult with Fortune 500 companies and help them make better products and services for mothers. And I am, as you said, the author of Slay Like a Mother, which has been really the joy of my life to help women all around the world slay their dragons of self-doubt.
And you do slay. So part of your story is that you are a high achiever and, in your words, collect or collected titles, accolades, achievements along the way. Tell us a little bit more about your journey.
Well, I have always been a human being that sought my self-esteem from the external world, and starting at a very young age. I mean, I remember as early as 10 years old, walking home from the 4th or 5th grade and getting straight A's and just couldn't wait to tell my parents, couldn't wait to show them, how great I was. And it just really, continued from there. And I always felt like if I was doing the most, if I was doing more, I was winning, I had, titles, trophies, ribbons, that people would love me. And it worked. That is sometimes what happens, in that sense where I was admired, I was respected. I had a huge career in the advertising industry, but it never really filled me up. As one of my therapists once said, I had a leaky bucket. And I just kept putting more and more stuff in the top. Look at me, look how great I am. But I didn't love myself on the inside. And so all of those titles and trophies and accolades didn't fill me up because external accolades don't do that.
Yeah.
You have to be filled up from the inside. So I learned the hard way, but I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I don't seek external accolades anymore.
Amazing. And I think there is a lot to be said about even just that. We could do a whole episode probably on the fact that we do live right now in a world where comparison is becoming more and more prevalent in our lives, and therefore maybe challenging our own self-worth. And that's something that we can shift, right? So you talk about slaying the dragon, but something shifted for you when you were doing a research project specifically with mums.
Yeah, so probably 15 years ago, in my career in advertising, we were pitching the global Johnson & Johnson baby business, and I had the opportunity to study mothers in 17 different countries. And at the time, I was a young mother, and I thought I was pathetic and everybody else was perfect. And I thought all these other mothers had everything figured out, and I couldn't wait to learn from them, what I could do better and how to be better. But what I learned was that all these women, whether they were from Brazil or Korea, India, it didn't matter. They were all as broken as I was, and they were all pretending to be people that they were not. Pretending that everything was fine, not asking for help, wearing a mask. And it was extraordinarily liberating because I thought, well, shit, if all these women are doubting themselves and I'm doubting myself, why are we not talking about the doubt? And why are we just pretending like everything is okay? And it sparked a 2-year self-help journey for me to figure out, why I had this leaky bucket, why I was empty on the inside. yeah, hopefully your listeners just hearing my story will be a little bit of an impetus for women and mothers to know that you're not alone.
And I think if you have connected to something that Katherine has just said, go and buy the book immediately, because I have read it and it certainly did resonate for me too, because I think we use smoke screens to hide maybe how we're feeling, and there's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders too. Women typically are still the primary caregiver. And so there's that mental load to juggle too. And we are surrounded by information and knowledge on how to do something well, aren't we? But not necessarily talk about it when we're not feeling great about it. And I think that's changing. But tell us a little bit about what you might see then, how that shows up in a boardroom. Do you think that you felt that when you were because you've been in some very senior roles. How did that show up for you in those boardrooms?
Well, probably very similar to many of your listeners. I suffered from what most people call imposter syndrome, which I don't love that term. I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I mean, I think anytime any woman is thrust into a new environment, a more elite environment, prestigious environment, something she's not used to, that we compare ourselves, to your point, and we think we're not smart enough, good enough, thin enough, nice enough. And I've seen it all over the world. I mean, I've seen partners in law firms that, women that have, worked in their career for 20 years and still don't feel good enough despite the ladders, that they have been climbing. So I think it's very natural for women to feel that way. But what I want women to know is that it is the environment that you are in that is making you feel bad about yourselves. When you look at, there's a recent study by McKinsey and leanin.org that studied 12 million employees around the world and found that for every 100 men that are promoted from entry level to managerial positions, only 82 women are promoted. And if you're a woman of color, that number plummets to 55. For every 100 men, only 55 women of color are promoted. And so, so I think it's like when the environment is not supportive of you, supportive of women, excluding us, leaving us out, etc., that it's only natural for you to feel as though you don't belong in this realm of being on a board.
It's amazing how those statistics really shine a light, right? Because the data doesn't lie. And so what do you do now? You go into some of those big companies and help them shape a better space for women, or you work with the women to share their voice?
Do both. When I do workshops and seminars inside of companies for working women, working mothers, and I believe it has to be a two-prong approach. So I work directly with the women and mothers themselves to teach them about the environment in which they have been raised to feel less than about themselves. But I don't believe that this is a personal problem. I don't believe that we can just send women to confidence classes and, reciting mantras in the mirror and all of a sudden, the world's going to change and we're going to feel like heroes all of a sudden. So I also work with the senior management of the company to really look into, are you promoting women at the same rate? Are you paying women at the same rate? Are you giving women the same, opportunities, and sharing some of the same statistics, and also sharing about the doubt that women and mothers feel inside of them, because we are so good at hiding and we are so good at keeping this information to ourselves that a lot of senior leaders, a lot of male senior leaders don't even know that women feel this way about themselves. And so it's one big honesty party, but I believe that it has to come from, the top and the bottom and the middle, and everybody's got to be educated.
I love that. Let's have one big honesty part. And so tell me what some of the common themes are then, because that must feel, and I know that I've seen that it can be quite a tricky conversation to approach to start with, right? Because typically it's like, well, we are being fair. We are promoting women within our business. We are doing what we need to do to support them. But actually the data still tells us that that's not happening enough. So how do you approach those conversations? How do you help women grow in those spaces?
Well, as you said, the data doesn't lie, and I believe the stories don't lie. And so One of the exercises that I do with women and mothers is I ask them to share out loud the last terrible thing that they said about themselves to themselves. And so most women that I work with don't have to go back to yesterday. They can think of something cruel and cutthroat and ugly that they said that morning, a couple hours ago. And what they say to themselves is absolutely horrific. I mean, it is, you're fat, you're ugly, it's a miracle your partner loves you. Nobody loves you. You're never going to get ahead. You're a frazzled mess. And when senior leaders sit in a room and hear women reveal the last terrible thing that they have said to themselves, it builds tremendous empathy. So sometimes the data alone doesn't do it, because people will say, well, that's not true at our company. That doesn't apply to us. But when they hear firsthand what their own environment does to the psyche of the women that work there, it's undeniable. And most senior leaders leave these sessions thinking, we have to help these women. We need to do our part.
I recently heard a comedian share, who's on a bit of a mission, but he shared that he'd never realised that it applied to his mum, sister, wife, etc. And then the second light bulb came that he realised that he'd never made it safe enough for them to share how they were feeling. And he said he was just blown away that it was these people on his doorstep actually that were feeling that way. And safety's such a big, important part in that conversation, isn't it? It's one big honesty party, but you need to create that safety in order for people to share. So that sounds like something that you do when you go into those spaces. So have you got any top tips then for anyone that's listening on how they might create some safety in their workplace in order to encourage those conversations?
For sure. And I think what helps women open up, especially in a professional environment, like your job, is what helps them open up is to hear other women opening up. And so, my advice is, once you read Slay Like a Mother and you have this vernacular and this vocabulary of what is my dragon of self-doubt, how was it born, how might I be feeding it, how might my company be feeding it, it creates this shared experience where, again, in the law firm, for example, I'll have, women that are partners that are sharing. They still don't feel like they have it figured out, and they're still trying to be who they want to be when they grow up, even if they're, later in their career. So I think if you can create an environment where even just one-on-one with your own mentor, with your own mentee, you are able to be vulnerable. You're able to say, I feel like a charlatan. I feel like a fraud. I feel like they're going to, figure out that I don't have this all figured out. That it's very freeing and very liberating. And I believe in that sense, even if the environment around you does not change, you can change the environment by feeling comfortable, especially if you're more senior, opening up and sharing how you really feel, because again, you're not the only one.
And creating that safety for yourself, to speak out and to share how you're feeling. I've read that there's also a statistic behind men get promoted, and the minute they get promoted, they say, what's next? Whereas women get promoted and they're like, whew, okay, so that's just, solidified the fact that I should be here, but now I need to prove myself. And so there's such a different journey, isn't there, in terms of how we show up and what validation we're seeking potentially in those spaces. And then unknitting your identity behind that can feel very, very vulnerable. What do you think we can do as individuals to create that safety for ourselves, to explore that piece of identity? What did you do?
Well, I hope your listeners will have the same experience I did, which was as soon as I started opening up and I started to give the people in my life a little bit of a peek behind the curtain that I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I was overwhelmed and I was chasing external validation. I was seeking love from other people because I didn't love myself. And when I started opening up and revealing my true self, warts and all, I never went backwards. I just kept going forwards, because what happened was I would say, I'm lost, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, I don't feel like I can do this. People did not reject me and the way my dragon of self-doubt had convinced me that they would reject me. And so, in many ways, I think I was admired more because I was honest and vulnerable and broken. And I found, and this is my advice, if you're just putting half truths out into the world, then you're only ever going to feel half loved back. And when I started revealing my true colors and was loved and respected for it, I'll just never hide again. And so while it's scary to start, it's not scary to continue because it just feels so much better than hiding and lying.
And probably so freeing. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember even with my own parents, I was 35 years old and still scared to, tell my parents I didn't love myself. I didn't respect myself as much as other people respected me. And it was so freeing. I gave a TEDx talk here in Richmond, Virginia in 2013, so 15 years ago. And that was really my coming out party. And that's what I recommend to women is you don't have to go give a big speech, but it is good to speak your piece, to talk about how insecure that you feel in kind of a big way that you can't go backwards on. And so when I walked off that TEDx stage, having stood in front of thousands of people saying I felt broken, I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like I wasn't clenching my teeth and my jaw and my ego, so tightly. And like I said, I will never, ever go back to hiding and lying. And I think people need to hear what I have to say as much as I need to say it. And I think it benefits a lot of people.
What a lovely takeaway. Just that vulnerability of being able to share how you're feeling and that touching so many lives. And so let's fast forward a little bit now that you have this incredible business that you've built following this unveiling of how you were really feeling. You have a board. Tell us what the makeup of the board looks like, how you look after it, how do you create a really lovely space for the people that you have around you?
Absolutely. So I do not have a formal board. One of the things that before in my previous career, it was growth at all cost, more, titles, trophies, accolades, salary, I just wanted more because I thought it would fill me up. But one of the things when I became an entrepreneur in 2014, I vowed that I would not make this company big. So we have 7 employees, we do $2 million in revenue, and it will never, ever, ever be bigger than it is right now. And I say that because I did not want a board, because I did not want to continue to chase growth. And most companies that have boards are trying to grow, at all cost, to people's, health and sanity and all of that at the expense of people's health and sanity. So while I do not have a governing board that tells me what to do, which I find very liberating, I do have what I call a personal board of directors that is 4 different people that I admire, respect, love, have far more experience than I do. And I turn to them for their advice and wisdom and experience. But it is just that. It's simply advice.
That's lovely, though, because I think what a lovely shape on what you've learned and not going after something bigger and better all the time and being able to keep yourself accountable to that. Presumably you use that personal board of directors to kind of say, well, hang on, you don't want to go any bigger, and keeping you in check, Katherine.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I've also had to train that board of directors, honestly, especially the men, that growth was not my goal, because that's always the goal. You're 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. And one of the gentlemen, John Kemper, who is on my board of directors, said to me, okay, well, the first year, okay, you hit your revenue goal, $2 million, what's the goal next year? And I said, it's the same goal. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, we're not trying to grow, so the revenue will be flat, He said, but why would you do that? You could make more money. You can hire more people.
Mic drop.
Yeah. And I said, well, why would I do that? And, and because my previous career before I became an entrepreneur, it was always more. And whatever we won and whatever we achieved was never enough. As a company, if we made $15 million, it went to 17, it went to 19, it went to 20. And it was exhausting. And we never really felt good enough because you never really feel satisfied because you always think that it could be better or more. And so it did take a little training in the beginning because I think the narrative around entrepreneurialism is grow, 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 and then sell, the company. And I've always said, I'm not in the construction business. I'm not building something in order to sell it. This is a wonderful company. I provide an amazing opportunity for a lot of women, and that's enough. And I think that's wonderful advice for women is, when is it enough? When can you say what I am doing is enough and who I am is enough? And I do not need to strive for more.
Wow. I don't feel that I should ask you anything else after that statement. What a line. When is it enough? I feel like you were speaking directly to me as well. So I can see why you make such a big impact in a room with women. I don't know where to go after that statement, Katherine. That's so powerful. When is it enough? Because we are typically always putting more on our own shoulders, actually. And saying no is about saying yes to ourselves, right?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to, what is your definition of success? And that was an activity that I'm a huge fan of therapy. I can't say enough about it. And my therapist had me do an exercise a couple years ago. And she said, I really want you to sit down and think about, what is your definition of success? And I was just following society's definition my whole career. It meant, again, titles, trophies, accolades, more. But in that environment, that didn't feel good to me because I was always chasing, always running, never felt good enough. And when I said, my definition of success, yes, running a successful company, but it's spending time with my family. It's having a very calm nervous system. It's being able to go to yoga. It's not working 80 hours a week. That is no longer my definition of success. But I think as women, we just follow the definition of success that society hands us. But at some point, you have to sit down and say, does that actually make me happy? Am I actually happy in this environment? And for me, the answer was no. I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, and at the height of my advertising career, I was drinking 63 servings of vodka soda every week. 63 servings of vodka a week because I had to have a release, from all the pressure. But now that I have a manageable life, a reasonable life, and I'm not chasing growth, I don't have to always, escape into the bottle anymore. I don't have to do that.
It's so wonderful to hear you speak so vulnerable, in such a vulnerable manner, but also in a way that really moves me personally. So I think that our listeners are going to get a lot from this episode. So I'd like to just finish on, and you've touched on it a little bit, I think. What makes you feel well? What do you do to keep yourself feeling good?
I could say that there are some things I support myself in the short term with, self-care, of taking a bath, going for a walk, spending time, with friends. But these days I focus less on self-care and more soul care. And soul care to me is about, it's just bigger than that. It's building systems that protect me, not just a short-term, release of taking a bubble bath. As an example, deciding that I'm not going to grow my company, that is soul care. And that is something that is put in place that helps protect me, in the long run. Being honest, being vulnerable, refusing to lie about how I'm feeling or what I'm doing. Those are really big picture, again, soul care techniques or methods that I use. As women, we have to get to the point where we're putting systems in place that protect us, as instead of just being reactive and taking the deep breaths when we can no longer breathe.
And it is a habit as well, isn't it? Breaking that habit of, I love that soul care and refusing to lie about how I'm feeling. What a takeaway. Katherine, finally, tell us, as an author, what's one of your favorite books or a piece of music that you love?
One of my favorite books is Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav, and it'll give you a sense into the depth of my soul care practices. So Seat of the Soul is all about honoring who you are on the inside and your soul and why your soul is here and what it's meant to accomplish. And the depth in that book is so profound, and it really proves that, chasing titles and trophies is not really ever going to do it for you, that you have to follow your own path and be true to your own soul. And it's very, very liberating.
Amazing. Can't wait to give it a read. Thank you so much for your time, Katherine. I truly appreciate it. And I am so amazed at how much you share in such a short period of time. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.